Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in tonight. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Fred Guttenberg to celebrate the publication of Find the Helpers, What 9/11 Taught Me About Recovery, Purpose, and Hope, published by our friends at Mango Media. Fred Guttenberg began his public life after the murder of his beautiful 14-year-old daughter, Jamie, in Parkland, Florida, school shooting on February 14, 2018. The day after the murder, Fred decided to attend a public vigil. While there, the mayor asked him to speak. His words shook a nation, and he has not stopped since. Only 4 months prior to the murder of his daughter, Fred's brother, Michael, passed away in October 2017 from cancer related to his service in 911 in New York City. He was one of the original first responders at the World Trade Center with a team of doctors who got trapped in the World Trade Center as it collapsed. Amazingly, the room that they hid out in did not collapse, and Michael and his team of physicians spent 16 days at Ground Zero taking care of others. Following his involvement in these two distinctly American tragedies, Fred has traveled the country talking about perspective, perseverance, and resilience. And that's what this book is all about. Moderating tonight's conversation, we're joined by the wonderful Glenn Kirschner. Glenn is a former federal prosecutor with 30 years of trial experience. Glenn currently works as an NBC News, MSNBC on-air legal analyst and teaches criminal justice at George Washington University. He has a YouTube channel and podcast, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner. I'll remind you that all of you watching tonight can order your copy of Find the Helpers from Books and Books below by pressing the green button at the bottom of the screen. Every purchase you make keeps Books and Books up and running, so we thank you and remind you that indie bookstores need your help now more than ever. All of those copies are going to come with a special signed bookplate, so please order away. We'll have time for a Q&A with the audience following the talk, so post your questions anytime during the broadcast in the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to those right after the talk. But now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest to the stage. Hi, Fred.
How are you?
There we go.
Hello. How are you, my friend?
How are we doing, Fred?
You know what? A lot better than this time a week ago.
Well, I think we all are. And yet I think we're still all anxious. We're still waiting. We're waiting for all sorts of shoes to drop, but I am guardedly optimistic.
We're going to be okay. You know what? This transition is going to happen in spite of somebody who has yet to come to reality on that, who is going to continue being disruptive, but it's going to happen. And we're going to go from somebody who is actively working to destroy this democracy that we love to somebody who has spent his life defending it. And I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah. And maybe over the course of the next 70 days, if we could all find a slew of helpers, that would be good.
I'm with you there.
So, and I appreciate you inviting me to have this conversation with you and ask you some questions about the book that I read, that I enjoyed, that I found painful, that I found emotional, that I found uplifting. And I'm going back and forth on whether I ultimately come away feeling hopeful. I think for the most part I do, but I have some questions about hope and how you maintain hope. But let me start by asking you, how did you come up with the title and with the idea for the theme of the book, Find the Helpers?
Yeah, it's a great question because it wasn't my intention. You know, after Jamie died, one of the things that got me through those first few months was writing. Actually, at I'm planning Jamie's funeral. The person from the funeral home gave me an empty journal and said, I want you to have this, use it. I said, I've never kept a journal before. He goes, start. I mean, it was really that simple. And so I started. And I started writing down every day what was happening, how I was feeling. And I believe it was in April, I decided I wanted to write the book. But the book that I wanted to write was just to tell my story. It was to tell about what happened to my family in 9/11 and on February 14th, to talk about what happened to our community, and then to talk about what I was doing. When I got done writing, someone who I trust implicitly, I shared the book with him, and he said, this book isn't done. And I said, what do you mean this book isn't done? He goes, I want to know more. He goes, everywhere in your book, you're talking about all these other people who have been a part of this experience with you. He goes, I want to know more about them. And I'll be honest with you, at the time I was exhausted having written what I wrote, but he pushed me. And I went back and spent several months rewriting the book to talk more about all of these people, to talk more specifically about what they meant to me. And as I was doing that, it became clear to me, I don't go forward from February 14th without them, that they had such an important role in helping me survive, in carrying me when I needed to be carried, in being there in these expected moments and in these unexpected moments, that it became for me the most important part of my story. I'm a guy who grew up in Mr. Rogers. And so when I was going through this, this quote of his stood out, which basically he's saying to people, his mother used to always tell him, whenever there's terrible things happening in the world, always look for the helpers, the policemen, the firemen, the doctors. I'll add your neighbors and so many others. And the last line of that was, as long as there are helpers, there's hope. That summed up how I was feeling. And after really kind of putting this quote together with the story I was trying to tell, the title to me was easy. It was Find the Helpers.
Yeah, and I found myself as I was reading dog-earing the pages every time a new helper would pop up. And some of them I think were predictable and were expected, sure, right? Like your brother Michael's medical coworkers and EMS and FDNY. And so you kind of expect coworkers, friends, classmates to be helpers when times are really, really difficult. But then, you know, I came upon some people that I guess I didn't think of. Like you mentioned the staff at the funeral home, and that they were helpers to you.
You know, on the worst week of my life, you know, the worst day was the day my daughter got killed. The second worst day was the day I buried her. But the third worst day of my life was the day I had to plan her funeral. And on this horrific, horrible day came into my life this group of people who surrounded my wife and I with love, compassion, time, and this experience, which was, we are here for you, whatever you need, whatever is going to make this better for you, because you can't make it good, but better. We're going to do it. You're not going to worry about money. We'll deal with the state directly on that. And this horrific day, there's this amazing group of people who helped my wife and I to be calm, to focus, and to be able to plan my daughter's funeral. And which to this day, I still am not sure how we got through that process, but we did. And it was because of them. And, you know, since you brought them up, I mean, I just told the story before about how this amazing person was thinking enough about us that he said to me, here's a journal. It's from me to you. Just use it. You know, because while I wasn't thinking about it at the time, I guess he knew enough about these things to know it would be helpful for me to write. I was never someone who kept a diary or a journal, or I was never much of a writer, but writing for me became the most cathartic thing I could do.
And then there's some other people that you say were helpers that, frankly, that's not where my mind would have gone, to the politicians. All right. And I admit I'm an apolitical person. I grew up in an apolitical household. And for 30 years as a Fed, I operated under the Hatch Act. And frankly, most of us in the federal government are just not political. We're just kind of there to work on behalf of the American people. So when I think of helpers, I don't think of politicians, but that was not your experience.
You know, what I discovered, listen, there's bad politicians out there, right? There's bad people in every walk of life, whether it's political, whether it's in the justice system, it's business leaders. But you know what? Most people just are not bad people. And I discovered that to be true with political people as well. Because of what happened to my family, I did meet a lot of politicians, both local, but also those who were not local, who I could never vote for, but who embraced my family and I, who in ways, some public, but many private, were always there for my family to make sure we were okay, and who really also took on this fight with me to do something about gun violence. You know, I tell about a lot of them in the book. You know, the first experience I had with a politician was unexpected. It was the day of the funeral. Ted Deutsch and his wife, Jill Deutsch, came into my life, and I did not want them at my house that day. I didn't want any political people there. My sister, my older sister, is the one who arranged it, and then when I said no, pushed me to be okay with it. And I'll never forget, I said, they can come for 10 minutes. And when they got to the house, I met them in the driveway, and I didn't really recall the details because my mind was spinning at the time. But my sister and Jill Deutsch at a later time reminded me of what happened. But apparently I aggressively approached Ted. And I call him Ted, not Congressman Deutsch, because he's become a dear friend. And I got in his face. And I started putting my finger in his face. And I said, I don't want you here tonight. But going forward, you're either going to be a part of doing something about what happened to my daughter or not. And if you are, we'll be friends. But if not, I'll be your worst enemy. He goes, I'm with you. And I told him, I said, you got 10 minutes. Long story short, they ended up spending that entire evening at my house. My family fell in love with them. My wife and I fell in love with them. We've been friends ever since. And he is the most decent, genuine person that I've met. There's you know, Eric Swalwell, who I've developed a really genuine friendship with. But then, of course, Speaker Pelosi and our next president, Joe Biden. You know, Joe Biden, he called me about 10 days after Jamie was killed. And I was getting all these crazy phone calls. I didn't pick up if I didn't recognize the number. And he left a voicemail that just said, listen, this is Joe Biden. And I'm like, Joe Biden called me. Wow, I didn't expect that. And he goes, I'm going to call you back later today. And he gave me an exact time. He said, if you don't answer, that's okay. But if you would like to talk, pick up the phone because it will be me. And he called back just like he said he would. We spent about 45 minutes on the phone. He was on a train from Virginia to New York. He wasn't running for anything at the time. And we had this amazing conversation about grief, getting through it. mission and purpose. He wanted to know about my family. He wanted to tell me about his family and how they've gone through this. And then he invited me and asked me to bring another Parkland parent, which I did, to an event that he was going to be at in Palm Beach a few weeks later. When we got there were like 300 people waiting to hear him speak. So I figured we would shake his hand. Before those people got to hear him speak, he invited me and the other Parkland parent into a private room so he could talk to us. We figured we were going to shake a hand. About 20 minutes later, I said, "You have a room full of people out there waiting for you to speak." And he just said, "This is more important." That's who he is. That's who our next president is. And Americans should be excited to understand that when we're going through what we're going through right now, we're getting a helper in the White House, a guy who wants to help, who wants to do right by Americans.
Yeah. And his compassion and his decent
real
concern, it's undeniable. I don't care what anybody says about politics. That's undeniable.
Yep.
And I want to ask you some questions about Jamie. But before I move away from some of the politicians, you've talked about some of the really good, helpful ones. Let me ask you about some of the other ones, like the Brett Kavanaughs.
So I think he's just a terrible person, to be candid. Listen, my book is focused on helpers, but reality is there are people who are not. And Brett Kavanaugh, for me, is one of them. The day of that hearing, I was there as an invited guest of Senator Feinstein. I was sitting maybe 15, 20 feet from Kavanaugh. Actually, I wasn't sitting. I was standing. Everyone else was sitting because I refused to sit in any of these moments where what happened to my daughter was going to be discussed. In this case, gun violence may have come up. I don't care to sit and make people comfortable. So I was standing. He knew exactly who I was. When they called the lunch break, I went up to talk to Senator Blumenthal, who I've gotten to know quite well. He's an amazing guy. As I was saying goodbye to him, I turn around and Kavanaugh's maybe 3 or 4 feet from me. So I walk the 3 or 4 feet. I extend my hand. He looks at me, and I said, "Hi, my name is Fred Guttenberg, father of Jamie Guttenberg, who was murdered in Parkland." And I know exactly what I said because I introduced myself to everybody that exact same way. I don't wait to let you know who I am. I tell you up front. And as soon as I got to the murdered in Parkland part, you saw him turn. You saw McGann, and I forget the other.
Cipollone.
It wasn't him. I forget who it was, but they were sitting there through the whole hearings. They get up and they just all do a beeline out of the room. And all I wanted to say to this guy was, "You introduced your beautiful family this morning. You and your family live in a community like Parkland, where these things aren't supposed to happen, and yet it did. And I want you to remember my daughter, the very first time a gun safety case comes in front of you. I want you to understand the reality." I never got to say it to him. What makes him, though, so bad to me is that he lied about something so innocent as that handshake. Because, as you know, at the end of these hearings, these candidates have to then answer follow-up questions from senators that are still considered under oath. And he answered a question about, he was asked about the incident with the Parkland parent, and his answer said, "If only I had known that was a Parkland parent, I would have offered my condolences. I wish I would have had the chance to do that." Well, I was there the rest of that day. I was there the next day when Lindsey Graham actually asked him about it, and he blew it off. And then I was there part of the third day. So he never took advantage of the chance to do that. In fact, he spent enough time with his eyes on these bracelets that I was wearing to let the police know that I had identifying bracelets on my wrist because I was actually pulled out and interrogated for that handshake. So I just think he's a terrible guy I hope when he has to rule on important things, he doesn't end up as bad as I expect he could be. But I'm not a fan.
So let me admit, the first time I cried when I was reading your book. All right. Having raised 5 daughters and 1 son, I have learned the value of crying. So the tears come. When I was reading about how your wife wanted a second dog for her birthday, and you wrote that it would turn out to be one of the greatest decisions for your family because, quote, our collective life would soon encounter additional trauma. We really needed our dogs. And I got this sense of dread when I read that. And then I turned the page and I saw the next chapter, Hunted on a Day of Love, Jamie midair, and all 5 of my daughters were dancers. And that was the first time. I feel like I'm intruding asking you about it.
No. I'm glad you did, because listen, when I say find the helpers, sometimes it's not always the person. In our family's case, it is our dogs. My dogs, what they did for us to help us get through this is something that I can't describe. When I tell people they're like my kids, I'm not joking. But here's the thing. And then you'll know, because I wrote about it. After my brother died in October, and we all got back to Florida, I asked my wife, what do you want for your birthday? And she's always said a second dog. I was always like, you know what? We have our 1 dog. We're good. You know, the dog is trained. It's perfect. We're good. And she said, I want another dog. And I had always said no. I'm always, no. We're good with 1 dog. She says she wants a second dog, and my 2 kids are at the dinner table, and they're all like, can we, come on. And I'm like, you know what? My brother just died. This will make my family happy. What the heck? We'll get another dog. As soon as I said that, they were on the computer with the breeder, searching out the dog, and we got another dog. We got the dog. It was sometime around Thanksgiving, late November. When Jamie was killed, that dog was still a puppy. And all I can say is, thank God I had those 2 dogs. Because for my wife and my son, having those dogs, as much as I'd like to think I'm a helper for them, I don't come close to the dogs. And I say that in a good way, because that's how we feel about our dogs. I mean, our dogs are that important to us. But yeah, the second dog was a puppy when Jamie was killed. The last picture I ever took of my daughter the day before she was killed was with that dog, the puppy, sitting in her lap. It is the last picture. And he's a big boy now. He's, but yeah, we love our dogs. But that's the thing about helpers, and that's what I hope people get out of the book. Be open to helpers coming in all different shapes and sizes, and sometimes expected, sometimes unexpected. Sometimes you'll know your helper, sometimes you don't. And I write in the book, for example, about a helper who I don't know, but who helped me deeply because I love my music, and it was Billy Joel. I grew up on the guy. He's been there for me through my entire life. When I was struggling with what happened to my family, I would get in my car just by myself. I would drive and I would put on my Billy Joel, and it would get my head clear. It would give me that time that I needed to just get balanced, for lack of a better word. And so, yeah, that's why I wrote the book, because at the end of the day, we all have ways to find help through helpers, but you have to be open to it.
Yeah, and being a helper yourself there's nothing more valuable than helping others. And I've always said, it's not necessarily because we're the greatest people and we're altruistic and look at us, we're all charitable. Helping others makes you feel good, right? And it's a win-win.
It is. Listen, I tell everyone, after you read my book, I hope if you do two things: always know who your helpers are. Always be open to the idea of helpers, new ones, as well as those you have in your life, being a part of your life. But also, always be available to be a helper to somebody, because there's always somebody who's going to need your help as well. And never in my lifetime has that been more true than what we're going through now with COVID. Mm-hmm. And families whose loved ones are dying and dying alone and getting buried alone because of COVID. I mean, these families, they do need our help. They do need our support. We are a really connected people, and togetherness is not a bad thing. In spite of what the past few years maybe have caused some to think that we're so divided, we're not so divided. We need each other. And let's be here for each other.
Can I ask you to tell the story about Love Jamie Day?
Yeah. My daughter, for anyone who has kids, you all know that whatever you think you do to outsmart them with your cell phone, they're smarter than you. And so they always could hack my phone, know my code, whatever. Jamie put on random days throughout my calendar, Love Jamie Day. And the very first time when I saw it, I was like, what is this? And she just did that smile laughing that she would always do with me. But basically what it was is like a Valentine's Day on steroids, which I never even thought about this since she was killed. As I say that, though, to think that she was killed on Valentine's Day. But it was like a Valentine's Day on steroids. And when Love Jamie Day would pop up on my calendar, I would immediately text Jamie to let her know. And that would be the start of our special day together, where I would do whatever I could to make my daughter happy, to show her how much I loved her, whatever she wanted. And, it was just this thing between us. So on the very first visit that I had to Washington, D.C., after Jamie was killed, it was about 3.5 weeks later. I was getting ready to walk into the congressional office building that Congressman Deutsch is in, because he, again, being a helper, his staff was going to help me get through that day. And as I'm walking in, my phone is in my pocket and it buzzes. I look at it and I have a calendar notification. It's Love Jamie Day. And you've been to those buildings before. You walk up the steps to walk in. I just sat down on a step and I broke down crying. And I sat there for a bit until I realized my daughter was sending me a sign. It's like, for me, all of a sudden I was like, you know what? This is her way of telling me she is with me today. Ever since that day, I always say she's standing on my shoulders, going with me everywhere I go. That day, that morning, I'm sitting there crying on the steps, waiting to go into Congressman Deutsch's office. And I realized, Love Jamie Day. She's with me today. I'm going to do this as her voice, and she is standing with me all day long. And I stopped crying. I got myself together. I walked into Congressman Deutsch's office, and the rest of that day was the start of my next 2.5 years. That was a day where I took on Senator Rubio again, where I did a Senate hearing, and I called out the NRA as a terror organization. And it was the first time where I realized the impact that I have by standing everywhere I go. Every senator and congressman's office I went into, you know what they always do. You get into their office and they sit you down. They want you to be comfortable. I refused to sit. That was the first day where all of this started, on Love Jamie Day.
So being, as you mentioned, the NRA as a terror organization and the sort of political involvement that you've had, I want to go to this one passage. It's on page 110. And you articulated something that I probably knew but never thought of, but now I'm going to incorporate it into my life's mission as well, because I am not done either prosecuting formally or informally by a long shot.
I would love to hear that.
You said, my family has been part of two distinctly American tragedies. Following 9/11, this country made changes to ensure a tragedy like that would never happen again. We changed the way we fly, and we added a Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
And you know what? I applaud all of our efforts in that regard to respond to that horrific tragedy. But what have we done to address the mass shootings, the school shootings, the theater shootings, the 40,000 gun deaths every year in this country, as compared to how we mobilized to deal with our experience on 9/11? That angers me and energizes me, knowing that we were okay, changing the world behind what happened on 9/11, and we do nothing. And frankly, the NRA does worse than nothing to deal with the proliferation of gun murders.
Listen, the NRA, and I don't say this about their members. Most of their members, actually, if you ask them, they support gun safety. But the organization leaders they're a front for a gun. They're a gun selling organization. That's what they are. Okay. That's all that they do. Any talk of gun safety potentially means fewer gun sales, because the whole concept of gun safety is to keep guns out of those who are violent or may become violent. And the NRA counts on them as well for gun sales. So for the NRA, my daughter was a cost of doing business. That's what she was for them. They need to be defeated. As long as they are fighting against our public safety, we need to work for their demise.
Can I ask you, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I find the State of the Union speech with Speaker Pelosi just fascinating, what you went through and how that ended up. Can you tell the folks about that?
Yeah. So I was there as Speaker Pelosi's guest, and early in that speech, and I'm not sure if you watched it or not, he did what he did the year before, actually, the same thing. He talked about illegals and how all crime in the United States is because of illegals. And if we only build a southern border wall, we will get rid of all crime. And he was going through this, and I was getting so angry because my daughter was killed by a teenage American male. And I was just sitting there. I was fuming. And then he went on with the rest of his speech, which just was a disgusting speech. And he got to this part where he said, and I will defend your Second Amendment, which is under attack all over this country. And when he says under attack, he's talking about by people like me. The Second Amendment is not under attack, okay? But people we love are. And the need to do something about that is real. When he said that, and it got me really angry, but what set me over the edge was when the entire Republican side of the aisle stood up like a bunch of trained animals and started cheering and clapping. And I lost it. And I screamed 9 words. What about victims of gun violence like my daughter? That's all I said. All of a sudden, a minute later, Jose Andres, who was sitting behind me, taps me on the shoulder, and he points to my right, and there's the Secret Service waving me out of my seat. Then he's taking his finger, he's pointing at the Secret Service, and he's pointing them to the row behind us. Because in the row behind us was Kim Guilfoyle, who's Don Jr.'s girlfriend, Bradley Parscale, a former campaign manager, and Ronna McDaniel. Now, I'm not even sure why they were there, because I thought this was Speaker Pelosi's section. But they were hooting and hollering all night, and nobody was pulling them out. So I get pulled out. I'm thinking, all right, they're going to just send me home. No problem. As soon as I get out, they start patting me down. They ask me for all my personal belongings. They put them in a bag, and they put me in cuffs. And all of a sudden, I'm like, am I under arrest? I said, all I did is ask about victims of gun violence, like my daughter. And they're like, you are under arrest. I said, do I need an attorney? They're like, no. I said, my phone is in Speaker Pelosi's office. Can I at least get that and call my family? And they're like, no. They said, we'll work on getting you your phone later. What was really crazy, and I didn't realize until hindsight, they never even read me my Miranda rights. So here I am. They're asking me questions about what I was intending and everything else. And then they walk me downstairs to this, I guess basement level where or garage level. And they put me into what I guess you would call a paddy wagon. It was just a basic steel box, no windows, and I'm handcuffed. I was scared for my life. I had no idea where I was going. I was maybe taken 5-10 minutes away. There's a detention facility. I was handcuffed to the wall. I was still being told I'm under arrest. I still haven't been read my Miranda rights. And I was told that I would be there the better part of the night. And I was still being told I didn't need an attorney. Maybe an hour later, they came in, they unlocked my handcuffs, and they said, you're free to go. And I was just like, what happened? And they said, change of plans. And when I got to the lobby, Speaker Pelosi had sent the sergeant at arms and a staff member to drive me back. But as soon as the speech ended, you talk about a helper when I needed it. She and Congressman Deutsch got in touch with the Capitol Police and demanded I get released. When they were driving me back to the hotel, her staff let me know that she was going to be calling. And I'm thinking, oh, I feel horrible. I embarrassed her. And I told her that. And she just said, stop. She's like, you spoke for America tonight. She's like, I'm proud of you. And I thought I was upset her, But at a time when I needed somebody to lift me, she did. And the next day, people all across this country were talking about gun safety because of what happened. So as down as I was feeling that night, the next day, this was a trending item on social media. People were talking about it, and they were supportive. When I needed helpers across this country, at really a very low point, they were there. I hate that I did it, but the result of it, I don't regret.
And you showed your displeasure in one way, and I think that was the night she showed her displeasure in another.
Well, she told me about that on the phone when I was being driven back. I wasn't there for that part. I was like, I couldn't believe it when she told me that. But listen, we don't have to be okay with the way that administration was being run. That was not a normal administration, and thankfully they are exiting.
Yeah. Let me shift gears again, because you talk about ritual in your book in a couple of different places. You talk about your brother Michael's ritual with the 2 iced teas. And then you talk about your ritual of going to Jamie's grave. And, we all suffer challenges, suffer loss in our lives. And can you talk about the importance or the value of dealing with it in part with ritual?
I never really thought about it so much as ritual, but I guess it is. But for me, it's the only place I get to go and be physically close to my daughter. And that's important to me. So, I had done a TED Talk about a year ago. And Jamie, I talked there about how at some point after Jamie was killed, I stopped referring to her as she was my daughter. No, I'm still a father of 2 kids. Jamie's still my daughter. But I described it as my relationship with her has changed. Well, for me, being close to my daughter matters. And so I do go. I go, and there's a bench that we have built right by her tombstone. And I just sit there, and where we picked the spot to bury her, off in the distance, and this is part of the reason why we picked this spot, there's just a beautiful canal, lake, whatever you want to call it, with a fountain. And I look out there all the time as I'm sitting with her. And anyone, if they were to drive by and see me, they'd probably think I was unstable, because I have full-on conversations. My hands are going. That I talk to Jamie. I get her caught up on what's happening with our family and in our life. I look to the sky for some kind of signs from my daughter, because staying connected to her is something I will never, ever, ever stop doing. And the more I do it, I think the healthier for me it is. That's my daughter. She will always be my daughter, and I will always, always need that closeness.
And I love the phrase that you said that maybe was one of her favorites, what dreams and dedication are a powerful combination.
So Jamie, and that's Jamie on the wall behind me, a photo of her. An artist drew that for us, but it was based off of a photo. She was a competitive dancer, and her dance instructor had all the dancers pick a phrase that mattered to them. And Jamie found this phrase online. She didn't make it up, but she lived her life by this. It was like she incorporated it into everything she did. And it's now my life. That phrase, dreams and dedication. I have a dream of a country where we are actively working to reduce gun violence, and I am dedicating the rest of my life to doing it. The way Jamie used that phrase to succeed at the things she did, she's given me the tool to really have a dream and to go for it. And that's what I'm doing.
I think you said that this experience has made you sort of fearless, whereas that wasn't the case before.
My daughter, when she was murdered, she was running down the hallway in school. And, unfortunately, she was killed in the hallway. So there is the hallway security camera system. So we know what happened. And she knew she was being hunted. She was running to survive. And as she was turning into the stairwell, one more second, she would have made it. As she was turning to the stairwell, a single shot. What she had was fear. Running from an active shooter, knowing she's running for her life, that is fear. I'll never, ever know the kind of fear that my daughter had. And because of that, I don't have the capacity for fear anymore. Nobody can use words or actions that are going to cause me to be afraid to do what I do, because I've already lost my daughter to the scariest thing that could possibly happen. What she had was fear. I don't have that capacity anymore, because I'll never, ever, ever be able to experience what she did.
So let me ask you, and I know we're going to save some time for questions.
Yeah.
But people are listening, are watching, and they want to get involved in gun safety issues, causes, organizations. Do you have any recommendations about where they should start, how they should go about doing it?
Listen, there's a lot of really great organizations out there. Some are big national ones, Giffords, Brady, Everytown. Some are local. Some are only statewide. And I would definitely recommend looking some of them up if it's what you want to do. You can reach out to me through my website, and either you can, I can direct you, or you can maybe help us do some of the work we do. But the most important thing you can do, and I tell this to people all the time, never shut up and always vote. Always vote. We are in this shape we're in right now because we as Americans did a terrible job of voting for too long. We stopped voting. Not enough people did. And I'm so hopeful, looking at the turnout numbers from this past election, that Americans understand that. Because if we want to get the kind of change that we need, that really matters to us and those we love, the way to do it is to vote. So, I encourage people, stay active, stay engaged. It's hard. Being an activist is hard. Using your voice in a public way is hard. But losing somebody you love to preventable violence is a lot harder. Don't let it happen.
I didn't know if we want to, I feel like we've overrun our allotted time here by 5 minutes, if there were going to be questions, or I can keep asking you questions.
Well, we have a couple of questions from the audience, so maybe we can take those and then
Okay.
with
You okay with that, Glenn?
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so President Biden says he will create a volunteer buyback program for guns. What else can he do to curb gun violence immediately?
You know, so there's actually a lot. One would be to refocus the effort as a public health crisis, which I think needs to be done because it is. There are executive actions that he can take that would allow that to happen right away, maybe even through some appointments or setting up of some new departments right away. You know, he can, from day one, talk maybe about having a listening tour across the country so that he can engage all the stakeholders in this issue while working to pass legislation. My hope is, rather than try to deal with this in a piecemeal way where we spend a long time saying, let's pass background checks, and then a long time saying, let's talk about a ban on this, or a long time saying, what should we do about age, would be that you have a comprehensive plan that encompasses everything, all of it, ready to go. You pass it through the House and you force the Senate to negotiate on a comprehensive plan, not individual components. And so there's a lot that he can do. But the really important thing he can do is, from the very first day, show this country this is a priority. And I know he plans to do that.
And if I could jump in on that,
Yeah.
Not only legislation, I would say we need to go scorched earth with executive orders. And I understand the legal challenges, but let's use executive orders to ban assault rifles. Let's use them to ban bump stocks. Let's use them to ban extended clips. Let's use them to put rigorous controls on ammunition. And you know what? I'm a lawyer. I'm a former prosecutor. I understand there will be court challenges. I say, bring them on. Bring them on, because you know what? We're going to win some of those dang court challenges. But timidity, Fred, maybe you'll agree with me, timidity has been killing us figuratively. So we have to take the gloves off and we have to get after it. If we lose in court, we step back, we retool, and we try again.
Well, and there's one thing I want, because you're right about timidity. And so currently in this country, there's a law called PLACA, which prevents people like me from being able to sue gun manufacturers. It was litigation that broke the tobacco industry. And I'm hoping we can get PLACA repealed as soon as possible in this administration, so that we can have this process of going after these gun manufacturers, putting these CEOs on the stand to have to admit under oath that they knew they were marketing these weapons to kids, and they knew they didn't have a plan to deal with the fallout from that. And if we can't do it by repealing PLACA right away, then what I would love to see is House and Senate hearings being called, where we call these CEOs to the stand under oath that way. But let's start doing this. And we're going to have an environment in DC now where that is going to be okay. So a lot we can do.
Great. Never shut up and always vote. I really like that. One of our viewers would like to know, has the killer ever reached out to show remorse?
I'm going to answer that this way. I don't talk about him. I can tell you he hasn't, but I don't talk about him. I have only one wish for him.
Okay, so another one of our viewers would like to know, are you considering running for office?
I'm not. You know, my politics is not in my future. I really think my role is using my voice to hold people accountable, is using my voice to go across this country, demanding that those who we do elect do what they're supposed to do, or helping to find others who will. I am not, I'll be real candid with you. We're going to succeed in this mission, but at some point, I need to also take care of me, maybe work on the grieving process a little bit, which I feel like maybe I've put off, spend some time with my family. Not there yet. It's going to be a few years. But politics, I don't see myself doing that. I like telling people what I think, when I think it, how I think it, and when I need to think it, without needing to worry about being moderated by any political concern.
That makes sense. So here's another one. Are there federal statutes holding gun owners liable when children and youth access guns?
Nothing of value. And in fact, one of the really important things that will happen in any legislation after President Biden takes office is safe storage laws that will have requirements around keeping your weapons locked up or facing the consequences if you don't.
Do you have any religious beliefs that help you or have helped you get through this?
It's a great question. I'm a Jewish person. I was raised in a somewhat religious home, but I'm really struggling in my relationship right now with a higher power. And that's a struggle that has been ongoing. Started after my brother died, and it went into a real overdrive after Jamie was killed. But who I am and the way I was raised with those religious beliefs remains intact. What's really, for me, and it came out of writing this book, it's the question you asked me earlier in the hour. It was the realization that while my faith in a higher power has been shattered, my faith, my belief is stronger than ever, but it's in people. It's in the people around me. It's in the people who I witness every single day doing amazing things. So while it's shattered in a higher power, my faith and belief in people is stronger than ever.
That is such a beautiful response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your generosity in sharing so much of yourself with us this evening.
Thank you.
The rest are all comments, again, along the lines of thank you, thank you for being so brave. So, Glenn, if you have any additional questions, maybe we should take those now before we close.
So let me ask you, Fred, where are you on the hope scale with respect to real change coming? I know we're all more hopeful with President Biden and Vice President Harris coming, but you know how powerful the gun lobby is and the NRA. How hopeful are you on the scale that we're really going to start to have an impact in the near future?
Oh, Glenn, I'm so hopeful. I'll be real honest with you. If you look back to when Jamie was killed, there was a period of time, people forget, where all of these elected people were running for their A ratings from the NRA. You don't hear anybody running for that anymore. There was a period of time where the NRA just simply didn't lose fights. And yet, 3 weeks after Jamie was killed, we passed gun safety in Florida. States across the country and cities across the country are passing gun safety. Now, the NRA keeps filing lawsuits. Big deal. Let them keep filing lawsuits because it's part of what's bringing on their financial demise. The other thing that happened, and why I have so much hope, is the business community. Business leaders have stepped up. You think of Ed Stack from Dick's, and I write about him in my book because the man is a hero to me. He is a helper, but he's a hero. He put his company really on the line, and he said, we are no longer going to sell weapons in our stores. These are sporting goods stores. He took an active stand against the wishes of the NRA and the gun lobby. And not only did Dick's Sporting Goods do okay, they've been thriving. And he showed how you can do okay by taking them on. Other businesses followed, banks followed. And now, what do we see? Politicians running on the fact that they are not connected to the gun lobby, that they want to do something about gun safety. I am so hopeful. We are going to get gun safety passed in this country.
And do you think the actions taken by Attorney General Tish James in New York to not only go after the organization, but to expose some pretty dramatic corruption in the upper echelons of the organization, do you think we'll continue to see that having an impact?
Well, what's amazing is what she did is, listen, ultimately I do believe that's going to bring the NRA down. What she exposed is that they were ripping off their members. That's what they were doing. They were committing financial crimes on their members. And the reality that financial crimes may ultimately be their undoing is probably not what I expected to be the case. But hey, I'm okay with it.
If I can ask one more question, and I know we don't have much time, but I want to ask you, how is your son, Jess?
So today is my son's 20th birthday. And, thank God he's doing okay. He had early struggles through this, but he's got this amazing group of friends that have just wrapped their arms around him and helped him to be okay. And my son, he's always had this desire himself to be a helper, a first responder. And he's still pursuing that direction in his life. In spite of what happened, more than ever, I think he understands that he can play a role as a helper for others. He idolized my brother. And, my son is going to do great things. And I'm really proud of him.
Last question, I promise. How is your wife?
It's tough. I tell people all the time, we both lost our daughter. She lost her way of life. We both lost our daughter. She lost her way of life. And so that's been a really challenging thing for her to work through. But you know what? And really, I go back to Vice President Biden, who spoke to me about how we all grieve differently. Together, we're getting through it. And we're doing, as my rabbi said, we're moving forward.
All right. Well, that's all I have, Fred. And I actually just got kicked out because of a phone call, but you can still see me. I just can't.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, my friend. And I'm just so honored that you wrote one of the blurbs for the book and that you agreed to do this. Thank you so much.
A fantastic conversation. And I'm so grateful to both of you for celebrating this wonderful book with Books and Books. And on behalf of Books and Books, Miami Book Fair, I send, our best wishes to both of you to stay well, to keep finding the helpers. I think this conversation is a helper already. I mean, it really is incredibly inspiring to me, I know, and I'm sure to a lot of the people that are watching this evening. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope that we'll see each other in person sometime soon. And
I hope so.
That we can all remain hopeful. And I remind everyone watching that you can order the book at the green button below. We have these great book plates. I don't know, Fred, if you want to show one. So the books are signed.
And I sign them here, and I send them to you, and you'll put them in the books for people. But at least people get a signed book.
So they are signed books. So thank you very much, and good evening to everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
Good night.